And I'm really looking forward to hearing Tamar. I never met you, Tamar, but I've heard a lot about you. And I heard that you're very, very passionate about Eretz Israel in general, specifically going up north, Galilee. I have relatives. My sister lives in the Golan area. And every time we go up to the Golan and we see the beautiful areas of Eretz Israel that unfortunately we don't get to see here in Yerushalayim because we have so many buildings. It's really an amazing area. So I'm just going to say a couple of words before we go right into it. You know, we started this past week Parashat Bereshit. And the first Rashi in the Sedra, Rashi says, and Pasuk Aleph, he says, I don't understand why Hashem is starting from Bereshit. Why not start from Chodesh Rishon hu lechodshei Hashanah? Start from the first mitzvah of Am Yisrael, which is Kiddush HaChodesh. You know, we come out of Eretz Mitzrayim, and we were given such a wonderful, wonderful, present from Hashem, a gift, becoming a nation. And the first thing we do is Kiddush HaChodesh. So why does Rashi say we should have started there? And the answer that he gives is based on a midrash. Says, no, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to start dafka from Sefer Bereshit, from Parashat Bereshit, because Hashem wanted us to have ammunition, so that when we go and tell the whole world, look, Eretz Israel belongs to us, we can track and go backwards and say, Hashem created the world. And that person, that Hashem that created the world also gave us Eretz Israel. And then we see going to Noach and Lech Lecha, finally we see Hashem really gives us Eretz Israel. But when he finally tells Avraham Avinu, Lech Lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladatecha me'beit avicha el art asher ar'eka, the words there are Lech Lecha. We're supposed to walk, we're supposed to feel Eretz Israel with our feet, with our bodies. There are two types of there's two ways to fall in love with Eretz Israel. One way is with our brains, with our heart, falling in love with what Hashem gave us. Hashem gave us a place that all Jews are supposed to be part of. But we're also supposed to fall in love with Eretz Israel with our feet, using our body. And that mizug of both our brains and our physical, our body is something that is very, very special to Am Yisrael. And unfortunately for us living in Yerushalayim, we don't get to see the beauty of Eretz Israel as much as we would like to. We see the beauty of Kedusha all the time. We live in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Us in Tel Aviv, we're so close to Har HaBayit. We're so close to Avodat Beit HaMikdash. We are so close to where all of Am Yisrael pulls in every single year, 3 times a year, Mitzvat HaKel. But what we're lacking is a whole nother place, which is so gorgeous and so beautiful. And I think that this is what Tamar will be teaching us and telling us all about, of how there's so much to Eretz Israel, the beauty of Eretz Israel. And at the end of the day, when Hashem ends and says to Abraham, Lech Lecha, it says there, Le'orka u'lerochba. And Orka Rochba really talks about all of the northern parts of Eretz Israel where it's just so beautiful there. So I want to thank, first of all, Irene Grossman for always organizing such a wonderful, wonderful event every so often. And of course, Avram Samson, our dear Rosh Vaad, who supports all these amazing new events that we do and constantly tries to, as much as he can, introduce new things together with all the VAD members that have great ideas. And last but not least, Tamar, thank you so much. And we're very much looking forward to hearing you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rabbi, for such a beautiful introduction. It reminded me of a gorgeous saying of a fellow tour guide who said, when you walk the land of Israel, you should walk it barefoot. For everywhere that you are treading, you're treading on a pasuk. Whether you are up in the Galilee and definitely down in where Hovevei is situated in Tel Aviv, or within very close proximity to Har HaBayit. What I hope to do tonight is to form a kind of bridge between the Torah that emanates from Zion and the special, almost distinct Torah that emanates from the Galilee, from my neck of the woods. And so I thank you for such a beautiful introduction. And I also thank Aunt Irene and Uncle Steve, the Grossmans, for inviting me tonight to join your Geula in sharing words of Torah. And also to thank my parents who are joining us from Baltimore. It's a rare treat to get to see them in the context of sharing Torah and a shiur via Zoom, because our times don't always match up. I know that Aunt Irene would be very angry at me if I didn't speak very briefly beforehand about why it is that she invited me to come speak tonight. I moved with my family from the area of Yerushalayim up to the Galilee, to the lower Galilee. For those of you who are familiar with Kibbutz Levi, very close to Kibbutz Levi, just a couple of years back, we live in a moshav called Sde Ilan, where we have a farm. And we are as ecologically conscious as we can be in our farming, trying to practice sustainable farming. Very busy with our turkey and our poultries and our organic olive grove and the rest of our farm that we're pouring all of the blood, sweat, and tears that we can muster up into. And in addition to that, I'm a tour guide, and my particular passion and specialty are the nachalot, the territories of the shvatim, of the different tribes of Israel, now especially the northern tribes. So I invite you, Be'ezrat Hashem, once COVID has come to an end, Be'ezrat Hashem, to come up and see our farm and to visit us here in the Galilee and draw from the special kochot of this area of the country, as the rabbi so beautifully expressed. Slightly different kochot than what you are so privileged to be surrounded by in Ir HaKodesh Yerushalayim. Tonight's topic is about the Geula, the redemptive elements of the North. There's a lot of beauty in the North. There's a lot of natural beauty that people take in and absorb however they may. But I would like to focus on a very specific element that the North offers. And that is the Itchalta de Geula, the beginning stirrings of Geula, of redemption, of this period that I think we all sense, although it's extremely hard to articulate, we are somehow involved in, whether that's called Acharit Hayamim or Kitz Hayamim or Itchalta de Geula or Yemot HaMashiach. We feel very strongly, and perhaps I'll speak only for myself, maybe we don't all feel very strongly, but myself and my family, having made this move, and especially with what's been going on lately with the breakdown within not just our country, but within the entire world, we feel very strongly that we're in something. And so we look to our rabbinic sources I've been within this year looking towards the rabbinic sources with an eye towards where I live and my landscape, to try and draw inspiration from the rabbis who lived here 2,000 years ago, from the landscape that nurtured our sages 2,000 years ago, the very sages who were responsible for bringing forth the oral law, the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Mishnah, which was written in Sipori, which is just a few kilometers down the road from me, the Talmud Yerushalmi, which was written in Tiberia. Even though it's named after your neck of the woods, it was written in my neck of the woods. That's just a few kilometers over to the east of me. And the Midrash Halacha, the Midrash Agadah, the Tosefta, all of the works of the Israel-based sages, the Tanaim and Amoraei Eretz Yisrael, who lived here only in the north 2,000 years ago. And so with that, we'll look first at one of the seminal teachings within the Talmud, within Masechet Rosh Hashanah. And I bring it here in Hebrew, but I'll just I'll read it in the Hebrew, and you'll please follow along in Hebrew or in English, whatever you're most comfortable with. Amar Rabbi Yehuda bar Idi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Eser Masaot Nasa Shechina Mikra'ei Ukenegdan Galta Sanhedrin. Now, at the end of Bayit Sheni period, 2,000 years ago, when the Shekhinah, when the presence of God was leaving the Temple Mount, the Shekhinah left incrementally. It left in stages. And To match those stages, we see that there were 10 stages, just as the Shekhinah left the Temple Mount slowly within 10 stages, as if reluctantly pulling back. We see that there were also 10 stages, 10 stations that the Sanhedrin, the august body of Jewish legislators that we call our Chazal, our Chachamim Zechronam Lebracha, they too went to different stations. And looking at some of the stations that they went to, some of them are down by you in the south. They left the Lishkat Hagazit, which was their natural home on the Temple Mount, and moved to Chanut. Anyone who's been to the Davidson Center, the Southern Wall excavations, and have seen the different Chanuyot, the shuk, that they had there in antiquity, where they would buy their sacrifices and they would buy even souvenirs from Jerusalem. All of those who, as the rabbi said, came to Jerusalem 3 times a year. There was a very active shuk there, and the Sanhedrin withdrew from the Temple Mount to the shuk. And then onwards from Jerusalem to Yavne, Yavne down in the south, Yavne to Usha. Usha is up in the north. That move from the south to the north was motivated by political factors, by the destruction of the south in the days of Bar Kokhba, in the days of the rebellion of 132 to 135 CE, after the destruction of the temple. And once the Jewish people were exiled from Yavne and exiled from the south, they remained in the north. Jerusalem was Judenrein, for lack of a better word. Hadrian did not allow any Jews to live in Jerusalem, and the entire south was desolated. So all of the Jews made their home in Steilan, where I live, and in the environs here, including the Sanhedrin and Chazal. So from Usha to Shfaram, from Shfaram to Beit Sha'arim, from Beit Sha'arim to Tzipori, from Tzipori to Tiberia. And Tiberia is lower than them all. The Tiberia amuka mikulan. Tiberia is the deepest of all of them. Now, what does this have to do with redemption? We have to continue on to see what the great sage of Tiberia, Rabbi Yochanan, who was the student of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the great Rebbe, the author of the Mishnah, who had moved the Sanhedrin from Tzipori to Tiberia, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, umisham atidin lihigael. It is from Tiberia that in the future, we will all be redeemed, or the redemption shall begin. We are destined to be redeemed. As it is written in Sefer Yeshayahu, Hitna'ari me'afar kumi shvi Yerushalayim. Shake yourself from the dust, arise and sit and return to Jerusalem. And somehow Rabbi Yochanan understood from this verse in Yeshayahu that the redemption that did not happen in his day, that remember when Rabbi Yochanan lived, he lived in the 3rd century Common Era. The temple had been destroyed. All hopes for rebuilding the temple had been dashed in the 2nd century already. And there was no hope on the horizon for a rebuilt Jerusalem, for Jews to be reallowed into Jerusalem and to rebuild the temple. So he's talking about some time in the future. And he said, when this future day will arise, the first stirrings of this energy of Geula will start right here in Tiberias. And that's what I'd like to talk about tonight. I'd like to talk about the specific nature of 2 key places in the Galilee, Tiberias and Arbel. These are 2 places, one right next to the other. I invite you to come and experience Tiberia. I know, Aunt Irene and Uncle Steve, if you remember, I gave you a quick tour of Tiberia when you were up here. And I would love for you to experience these stirrings of Geula that I really sense very strongly when visiting these places. And let's take a look back in history and try and build for ourselves an understanding of what makes Tiberias the center of redemption, of the future redemption, and what really is the secret to the Kedusha, the holiness of Tiberias. There are 4 holy cities within Eretz Israel. 3 of them, I think, are almost muvan me'elav. It's almost assumed that they're going to be holy. Hebron, Yerushalayim, of course, first and foremost, Hebron and Tzfat, and then we have Tiberia. Always a puzzle. I think I'm going to assume that many of you have been to Tiberia, and everybody comes to Tiberia all excited, the Kinneret, and especially recently with Kinneret, so full and lush. and we're going to experience something new. And then you come to Tiberia, and I'm only speaking for myself, but it can be a big letdown. It is not the most beautiful city. It's hard to grasp the holiness of Tiberia. It's hard to get beyond the difficult state that it's in now. And so that's what we're going to try and understand, and try and make our virtual tour of Tiberia into something beyond the Kinneret and Aquakif. Okay. Here we go. Now we're going to work our way down through history, starting from the more recent iterations of Tiberia. Who we're looking at right now is the 18th century Bedouin sheikh known as Dar al-Omar. He is sitting in his palace in Tiberias, and he is looking out at the city that he built. So we're talking about the 1700s, where this fellow, Dar al-Omar, came to a desolate Galilee. There were maybe hundreds, if not a few thousand felachim living here, trying to eke out a living for themselves. And he revitalized the whole Galilee. How did he revitalize the Galilee? By inviting Jews who lived outside of Israel to come into Israel and bring their congregations, because he was wise and he knew that Jews are able to succeed in the places that they are to be found and bring prosperity with them. So he invited the likes of Reb Chaim ben Attar, who went down to Jerusalem and enhanced the community there. He invited the Ramchal, who settled in Akko, and he invited Reb Chaim Abulafia, and he asked of Reb Chaim Abulafia to come to Tiberia and to bring his congregation, and Reb Chaim did this, and there we go. And here you can see a picture of the Beit Midrash of Reb Chaim Abulafia, who was very instrumental in revitalizing this desolate city of Tiberia. Now, Reb Chaim Abulafia, when he came to Tiberia, did not just come to a city that Dar al-Omar requested he come to and revitalize. He felt a special kinship with Tiberia. And you see here, I bring his dates. He's from the 18th century. And he had the following to say about his new home. And he said, Tchilat hashchina hu b'Tiberia. The beginning of God's presence is in Tiberia. It's a very interesting statement. Umikan atidin lihigael. And it is from here that in the future, there will be redemption. Redemption will start. So perhaps Reb Chaim Abulafia felt himself part of this process that his predecessor of 1500 years, Rabbi Yochanan, that famous first of the Amorae Eretz Israel, had stated about Tiberia. There's something about Tiberia that is not just a new city, because Reb Chaim Abulafia was coming to the new city that Dar al-Omar had built, but it is a city that has a deep and almost in a way too deep holiness that he came to access and to help expose and inculcate within his students. Now, one of his students was his son-in-law, Reb Yaakov Beirav. For those who are interested in Jewish history, don't confuse this Reb Yaakov Beirav with the Reb Yaakov Beirav from Tzfat, who renewed the Sanhedrin. This is a Reb Yaakov Beirav who lived in the 18th century, again, a student, a son-in-law and student of Reb Chaim Abulafia. He lived in Tiberia with his father-in-law and family, and he wrote a song about Tiberia. And he said the following, Rotzani la'aroch shir. I'd like to prepare a song. Rotzani la'aroch shir et shem hakel lahaskir. Ala sher shavali hizacher ha'ir Tiberia. I would like to mention the name of God that once again the presence of God has returned to make known this city of Tiberia. And he goes line by line with his joy at once again being able to talk about Tiberius, Tiberia in living terms. And I'd like to look at the last two lines of his song. Vadai lekan yashuvu hasanhedrin yasisu. Surely here the Sanhedrin will return and they will rejoice. Umikani galu rishona mitiberia. It was here that they were that we will first. It is here that we will first be redeemed from Tiberia. Tilot nitan le'el. Let us give praise to God. Shir chadash nashira. Let us sing a new song. Na'ale Yerushalayim mikan mitiberia. Let us arise and go to Yerushalayim from here, from Tiberia. So Rabbi Yaakov Beirav is echoing the sentiment of his father-in-law and saying that this is really the beginning of our Geula. And he adds a gloss here in saying, Vadai lekan yashuvu hasanhedrin. It is here that the Sanhedrin will return and in a way be revitalized. And this is a key theme because the Sanhedrin was at their apex in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara in Tiberia. It was in Tiberia that the great product of Jewish scholarship, the Talmud Yerushalmi, was taught, was labored upon, was authored. Tiberia marks the longest period where the Sanhedrin sat and produced the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral law. So the Sanhedrin was disbanded in Tiberia at the beginning of the 5th century. And Rabbi Yaakov Beirav says it will once again emerge from the very place where it was disbanded. Now we go further back in history. If we were just dealing with the 18th century, now we're going to the 14th century, to one of the pilgrims who came from Florence. Florence is in Italy, right? I don't know, I don't know much outside of Eretz Israel. Please nod, am I right? Florence is in Italy. Okay, yes, my father's saying yes. So this is a fellow named Reb Ashtorai HaParchi, Parchi from Florencia. This was a pilgrim who came to the land of Israel and wrote a sefer about his journeys in Eretz Israel in the 1300s. In the 1300s, he lived from 1280 to 1355. Now he's known as Eshtorai because it's his pseudonym. He was a man from Tours. Tours is in France originally. Ishtor, Eshtorai HaParchi, but then he moved to Florence. So it's all a pseudonym. And he's named his sefer Kaftor V'Ferach as a play off of his pseudonym, which Kaftor V'Ferach is an expression, biblical expression for me, which means beauty. It's that what's associated with the menorah, as you see a picture here, which was formed by these bulbs and flower decorations. And in his journeys through Eretz Israel, remember in the 1300s, Tiberia wasn't much to speak of. And in general, Eretz Israel wasn't much to speak of. And he has the following to say, Atidin, matai ir hakodesh Tiberia tibaneh v'tichonen lakum b'tchiat hametim. In the future, because I can't speak to the present, my present Tiberia really doesn't look like much. It was only Dar al-Omar who built those massive walls around Tiberia. It was literally a hamlet with maybe 20 families. In the future, the holy city of Tiberia, may it be rebuilt and reestablished, will arise in Tchiat HaMetim. I guess the last 100 years must be some sort of Tchiat HaMetim. 40 shana kodem kol ha'olam. And it will, can you not see my video? Okay, there we go. Thank you, Mervyn. 40 years before the rest of the world will awaken. So here, hundreds of years prior to Rav Chaim Abulafia, we have a pilgrim to Eretz Israel saying, I don't see much of Tiberia now, but I have a tradition, and I'm recording that tradition and delivering it to you, that the future's here. The future's in Tiberia prior to the whole Renaissance, the whole revitalization of the Jewish people in Eretz Israel, in the greater Eretz Israel. The genesis is right here in Tiberia. Now, here we're looking, I'm taking you to about 100 years back to look at the kever of the Rambam the Rambam Maimonides, who spent some time in Eretz Israel, but to the best of our knowledge, was not in Tiberia per se. He did make it down to Yerushalayim, but lived the end of his life in Egypt, and the rest of his life in other places, obviously Spain, where he was born. The Rambam is buried in Tiberia. Now, he is probably the most, I don't want to say illustrious figure buried in Tiberia, but probably the most well-known figure buried in Tiberia. And the reason why so many people come to visit Tiberia, this is what his grave looked like about 100 years ago. And this is what it looks like now. This is the recent revitalization of the Kever HaRambam. Here's a beautiful picture of it being lit up at night. And I brought that to show how the personage of the Rambam made it to Tiberia. And for those who are skeptical about Kivrei Tzadikim, Rambam is not one to be skeptical about, because with almost 100% accuracy, he is buried in Tiberia. For those who are interested to know how I know this, I'm happy to delve into that after the shiur. Please feel free to ask me. But the Rambam has the following to say about Tiberia, the city of his burial, but not the city where he ever experienced in his lifetime. And he's echoing the words of the Talmud in Rosh Hashanah. There were 10 places that the Sanhedrin were exiled, and the last station was in Tiberia. And from the disbandment of the Sanhedrin up until today, there has not stood a Sanhedrin. There's not been as august of a body since the sealing of the Talmud Yerushalmi. The Kabbalahi, and we have a Mesorah, we have a tradition. And here the Rambam is writing from the 12th century. The Kabbalahi, Shetiberia atidin lachzor tchila umisham ne'etakim lemikdash. That Tiberia, and same thread that we've been developing up until now, that Tiberia will be the first to experience this revitalization, and only from there will Yisrael, or will an essential element of Am Yisrael go up to Yerushalayim and move to the Beit HaMikdash. Now, this, I think, is the first real concrete reason that we can ascribe to the question of why does the redemption begin in the Galilee? Why specifically Tiberia? Why do we have such a tradition? And I think the Rambam here states it quite clearly that the Sanhedrin last met and last produced in Tiberia. So where they last produced is where they will once again meet and begin the Geula, begin the redemption process that requires us to have courts and requires us to have Chachamim leading us. And it is a process that begins in Tiberia where it had ended 1,500 years ago. So this is, I believe, again, the first answer to addressing the question of redemption in the Galilee. The Sanhedrin last met here, and so they will once again be revitalized and reborn here in the Galilee where they had last met, kind of picking up where they left off. Now I'd like to go into a slightly deeper direction, if I may. One more way to address the idea of Geula beginning in the Galilee, not just that the Sanhedrin last met here, but other elements that Chazal draw for us. Look at Saadia Gaon. Rav Saadia Gaon, who was probably the most famous of the Gaonim, the Gaonic period, spanned from the sealing of the Talmud Bavli in the 500s through the beginning of the Rishonim period in the 900s, almost 1,000, with Rav Gershom Meir or Hagolah. Rav Saadia Gaon had actually spent a good deal of time in Tiberia. Tiberia was the center of Jewish life in Eretz Israel for 800 years. So even though the Sanhedrin ceased their activity in the 400s because of persecution, the Jewish community in the main and the scholarly element of the Jewish community continued their activity in Tiberia. This is where the Masoretic text was developed. This is where famous Paitanim, famous Jewish poets lived and produced. And Rav Saadia Gaon was here in the yeshiva in Tiberia. And this is what he has to say. In Tashlim HaTshuva, Yavo Ben David, Miyad, Pitom Yavo Ha'adom. If we manage to get it right, and all of us do the proper tshuva, then immediately Mashiach ben David, the Melech HaMashiach, will come and change all of our reality. V'im lav, what's much more likely? If not, Yavo HaKetz b'hashlemuto. Then the end period that's described by the prophets as a somewhat even prolonged and awful time of wars and difficulties, will experience the end of Bria, the end of creation thusly. V'az yiyu milchamot, there shall be wars, v'yamdu ish mibnei Yosef b'Galil. And the Mashiach ben Yosef, that first Messiah, the predecessor to the Mashiach ben David, he who will unite all of Am Yisrael, he who will bring all of Am Yisrael back into the land of Israel in Kibbutz Galuyot, he who will fight the wars that Am Yisrael needs to fight in the land of Israel and will die in those wars, and then will usher in the era of Melech Mashiach, Mashiach ben David, the Mashiach of Yerushalayim. This Mashiach ben Yosef will emerge from where? From the Galil. Now, he's not specific about Tiberia, but he does say there is something about the Galil that will bring forth this Mashiach ben Yosef. And it's that I'd like to explore just a little bit. I am keeping my eye on the time. I have till 9 o'clock. Am I correct? This is an 8 to 9 shiur. I'll try and end a little bit earlier for questions. These sources that I bring here, and I bring 3, and it's a lot for the eye to take in, but I'll go through them very quickly. You can just see that I chose very carefully from a gamut of sources, rabbinic sources, that talk about Tiberia and the north as seeking out Mashiach, as being the home of Mashiach, the place from where Mashiach, specifically Mashiach ben David, will emerge. Here we have in the Yalkut, which is a pretty late Midrashic compilation of the Middle Ages from the 12th to 13th century, Tiberia Mishalemet Mashiach, which means Tiberia is waiting to greet Mashiach. It's asking after the welfare of Mashiach, specifically Tiberia. And then continuing on in my sources here, where Rashi is examining this midrash, and this midrash is not only in the Yalkut, but it's also in Bereshit Rabbah, which was actually authored in Tiberia. It was in the 5th century from Tiberia. And Rashi, from the 1000s, is saying on this idea of Tiberia is the one who's seeking out Mashiach and hoping for Mashiach. Tiberia Mishalemet LaMashiach, Mishalemet HaGeula. It is from Tiberia that this yearning for redemption comes forth. Shebetiberia Paskah Sanhedrin, just like the Rambam would say that the Sanhedrin ceased in Tiberia. Shamishante Elach Lo Galta, that it never left Tiberia. It ceased in Tiberia. V'sham Mamtenet HaTorah Ad Sheyavo Melech HaMashiach, and it is there that the Torah sits in wait, as it were, until Mashiach will come. So echoing that idea of the Rambam, that it is the Sanhedrin that will be the stirrings of Geula here. But he does mention Melech HaMashiach and the hoping for Mashiach that comes from the north. And the last source that I bring here for you is the Yalkut on Yeshayahu, where Rabbi Yochanan had introduced this pasuk that shake yourself off from the dust, rise and go to Jerusalem. Utveria amukam mikulam, Tiberia is the deepest of them all, ki dichtiv v'shafalt me'eretz tadaberi, and you shall speak from the lower, from the ground. Tiberia, which is 230 meters below sea level, the deepest city within Eretz Israel, is where the tkuma, where the I don't want to use the word uprising, where the redemptive sense and sensibility of Am Yisrael will come from. It is from the depths of Tiberia, like bringing back, very evocative of the Rambam being buried in Tiberia, of the many, many sages from the medieval period onwards. But prior to the medieval period, in the Gemara tells us that the Tanaim and the Amoraim were all buried in Tiberia. If we normally associate a Tchiyat HaMetim, I'm not going to translate Tchiyat HaMetim because I don't know how, but if we normally associate this period of Mashiach and revitalization, the bringing to life of the dead, with Har HaZeitim, Chazal are also steering us to look at Tiberia as the place of this new energy that is going to then be almost danced down to Yerushalayim. That's how I see the move from the Galilee to Yerushalayim. I see, my husband and I raise the sheep that we then bring to you for the Karban Pesach. And as we come enjoy in those Shalosh Regalim, that the burial, the interment within Tiberia, the depth of Tiberia is what Chazal sought. Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai is buried here, his Talmidim are buried here, Rav Chia is buried here, Rav Huna is buried here, Rav Meir is buried here, Rav Yirmiyah is buried here, over and over and over again. The Talmud speaks of the great sages who wished to be buried in Tiberia, and in their footsteps followed the illustrious Rambam and many other later sages, including, of course, Rav Chaim Abulafia, with this desire to somehow dig deep into this holiness of Tiberia and be interred here and be buried here, and experience the Tkuma, experience the Tchiyat HaMetim that is promised to come from Tiberia. It is not only the Rambam and not only our sages from 2,000 years ago that we have a tradition of being buried in Tiberia and of forming, as it were, the holiness of the city of Tiberia. But let me just move on for 1 second. Sorry. I'll get back to all those pictures in just 1 second. Okay, but it is also a very old tradition that the well of Miriam, the Be'er Miriam, is to be found in the Kinneret. And this is not a tradition that's a medieval tradition. This is a tradition already from our rabbinic sources. Here I show you pictures of these. You see these pillars here? This is a photograph from the previous century. And here is a drawing of those pillars. And you can see here now modern day steps leading down to these pillars. These are believed to be the pillars of the Beit Knesset, of the synagogue of Rav Ami and Rav Asi, that they had built over and against where they believed the well of Miriam to be sunk in the Kinneret, which is quite unusual considering that the well of Miriam, Be'er Miriam, accompanied Am Yisrael through the desert. And we have no verse in the Torah telling us that somehow this well was then transported to an area of Eretz Israel, a sea within Eretz Israel. But this is our rabbinic tradition. Again, not just a folk tradition, but a rabbinic tradition from the Yerushalmi, from Midrash Tehillim, from the Tosefta, that Miriam's well is buried within the Kinneret. Not only that, but in the same vein, Yehoshua is said to be buried in Karnei Chitin, which is very close to Arbel, right here, maybe 10 minutes from me. And Yericho is Chazal identified, the city of Yericho, the first city that Bnei Yisrael came to within Eretz Israel. Chazal, for some reason, identified with Tzemach. Now, you all know Tzemach, because as you drive up the big that's the big mall that you get to right at the base of the Kinneret, and that was an ancient city. the Kever Imahot, which I always like to take people to in Tiberia, is another tradition of our sages that we all know where Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah are buried. Or we think we know where Rachel is buried. That's Teku. We'll leave that for a later time. But what about the other imahot? What about Bilhah and Zilpah, the Shfachot? What about those women associated with Moshe and Aharon and David, Yocheved, Tzipporah, Elisheva, Abigail? Let's just put them all there. And where are they all going to be buried? In the north, in Tiberia. And here's another picture from the Kivrei Imahot. And here's a picture of Dinah's grave, and Reuven and Shimon and Levi, all of these biblical figures, Yehoshua, and the Mateh Aharon, the stick of Aharon that blossomed into almond blossoms. All of these biblical relics, these biblical personalities are all said to be buried in and around Tiberia. So this Mesorah, this tradition of the interment of the holy within Tiberia is not a modern tradition. It is an ancient tradition. And it was from this tradition that our sages drew, I believe, some of their sentiment and inspiration that there is a holiness to this place that will feature in the future. That it's not just that the Sanhedrin met here, and so therefore they will meet here again before removing to the Lishkat HaGazit in the third Beit HaMikdash, to their modern quarters in the third Beit HaMikdash. But also there is something about this area of the country, the north of the country, that is a repository of Kedusha. So the Kedusha from the biblical times, from the sons of Yaakov, from the wives of Yaakov, from the wives and mother of Moshe, who again is said to be buried here, the wife of Aharon, etc., building a motif of Kedusha that is buried deep here in the north. Now, I skipped all of those wonderful slides, and I'm going to go back now. We're going to do a very quick virtual tour of Tiberia. This is the street that Rav Sadje HaGaon walked on with almost 100% certainty because it's dated to the 9th and 10th century, the Muslim era of Tiberia. Nobody ever goes here. Where do you go? You see in the background Aqua Cave. That's where everybody goes when they go to Tiberia. You bring your grandchildren to all the fun water sports. My daughter was just there today, going jet skiing on the Kinneret. But people don't really go to the ruins of Tiberia, this Tiberia that our sages walked in and taught in and prayed in and experienced, and which was the setting that produced the Talmud Yerushalmi and so many other works of our Rabbanim. But this dates to the Muslim period, again, the 800s, the 900s. And here's an artist's drawing of what Tiberia would have looked like. This to me is fascinating. Tiberia is celebrating its bimillennial. It was originally built by Herod Antipas, who was the son of Herod the Great, one of the sons of Herod the Great, in the year 19 or 20. So Tiberius, unfortunately, doesn't know how to draw on its PR very well. It could have made a huge deal out of this, and I didn't hear anything about it. It's 2,000 years old, built from nothing as a wonderful Roman city. You can see here the Cardo, the main road, and the Decumanai, the secondary roads, the east-west road. Here's the north-south road. You see here a magnificent theater. And a lot of this was excavated, but it's sitting under rubble and you can't really access it unless you know what you're looking for. But luckily I'm a tour guide and I know what to look for. So here you can see, not the best picture of the remains of the theater. Here, do you see Aqua Cave there in the background? We're gonna do a very quick little, there we go. You see those beautiful, look at how well it's kept, right? It's in really pristine condition, this theater. Now every good Roman city had to have a theater. Let's see if it scopes out. You can see some more of the ruins. So this is the modern city of Tiberia, and here's Mount Mount Bernice, which was named after Agrippa's sister, was the concubine of Titus. And here is the remains, which you wouldn't know what to look for unless you had a guide. Oh, okay, hold on. Can you see my screen? Can you still see my screen? Thumbs up, please. Can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's go to share screen. Hold on one second. Okay, so one second, I just want to get back to, sorry for this. Nope. There we go. Okay. Second. Okay. So here we have another artist rendering of the city, and here you have a picture, a photograph of the gate of the city, the southern gate of the city that you can see right over here, right? Do you see that southern gate? This is an artist rendering, and this is the real deal. This is the real thing. This is what the Sanhedrin would have seen, and the gate by which they would have left to go down to Hamat Tiberia, which is just to the south here. And it's in really fabulous condition, as you can see, and something very much worth seeing. This is the bathhouse of Tiberia, the bathhouse where we have midrashic stories of Rabbi Akiva visiting this bathhouse, of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai visiting and getting healed in this bathhouse and in other bathhouses within Tiberia. And so I think you might have to mute everyone, Mervin. Here's another photograph of the bathhouse, a good Roman bathhouse with the hippocaust, the whole heating element that's going to provide a nice, comfortable experience for the bathers, including Chazal, including our sages. And here is some of the mosaic floor that remains from that bathhouse. Okay, what we're looking at now is a gentleman who is standing in the room where the Sanhedrin met to write the Talmud Yerushalmi. It always amazes me that we have such access to the meeting point between text and history. So for those who are lovers of the Talmud and who would like to actually be in the places where Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi in Beit Sharim and Tzipori, Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Yassi, Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Yirmiyah, etc., in Tiberia, where they produced, where they were inspired, the landscape that inspired them, we can go to the actual room where the Sanhedrin had met. Now, I will just show you a very quick, that's not going to work for me. Oh, we go. A very quick video that will have a good view of this is the bathhouse. And this is the room where the Sanhedrin met. Here you can see a nice aerial view of the theater. A show of hands, has anyone ever been to see this? These ruins from Tiberia? This is the room where the Sanhedrin met. They know based on archaeological evidence that it dates to the time of the 3rd and 4th century. It was also a very large room and a very large edifice, large monumental building. So they assume that's the place where the Sanhedrin met. So moving along to just the last few minutes that I have here to talk about the second element of the Geula. If the first element had been that the Sanhedrin had last met in the north, and so there they will be revitalized and re-energized, meet once again, convene before coming down to Yerushalayim. This second element, which was a little harder to articulate, is an element that's intrinsic to the north, an element that produces the Mashiach ben Yosef, that produces a a hitchalta de Geula, beginning stirrings of Geula, and that the sages had hit upon over and over and over again, both in their teachings and in their lives, in their desire to be buried in Tiberia, and in their ascribing biblical figures and biblical stories to the area in the north, the areas around Tiberia. So here we see in the Yerushalmi, which was again authored in Tiberia, Rabbi Chia Rabba Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta. Rabbi Chia lived in Tiberia. Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta lived in Tzipori. Tzipori havu mahalchin bahadza bikat arbel b'kritzata b'zricha. They were walking towards Tiberia from the west via the valley of Arbel. They saw the sunrise that was emerging. Amma Rabbi Chia Rabba Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta Barav Kachi Gulatan Shal Yisrael. Just as we see the sun slowly rising from the east, such is going to be the Geula of Yisrael. B'tchila kim'a kim'a. It won't be a Mashiach just being sent down from heaven on a white mule and surprising everybody. It will be a gradual process, an emergent process. Kol shehi holechet, hi holechet umeir. It happens very slowly, but as it continues on, it continues on and gains in strength. And so, just very quickly, because we're pressed for time, this idea of the gradual emergence of Mashiach and of the Geula being based in the north is something that that our sages have hit upon over and again. Look at this piyut. Look at this this liturgical poem from Rabbi Lazar HaKalier from the 6th century. He lived in Tiberia, and he said, "Bayamim hahem u'ba'etahi," in that future time, b'chodesh harishon u'chodesh Nisan, omnam arba'asar yom bo, on Pesach in the month of Nisan, Menachem ben Amiel pitom yavo. This fellow Menachem ben Amiel will suddenly come, b'bikat arbel yitzmach tuvo, u'bigdena kam yilbash b'chatuvo. Where will he be coming from? He'll be coming from the Bikat Arbel. So this figure, Menachem ben Amiel, this redemption, this figure of the redemption, will be coming from the north. And I won't belabor this point, but just to demonstrate to you over and over and over again that our sources are dealing with the idea of the end of days happening here in the north. So not just that the Sanhedrin is reconvening here, but as you see in the Sefer Zerubbabel, in the 7th century, a very apocalyptic work, an eschatological work discussing the end of days, expanding on the person of Menachem ben Amiel. Here I'm in the 2nd paragraph. Vaya'al Menachem ben Amiel minachal hashitim. So coming down from Nachal Shittim, vayipach ba'apav shel Armilus v'yimitehu. He breathes in the mouth of the Antichrist. Basically, Armilus is everything negative about the Goyim, about the Romans, and he kills him. Vayetzei Hashem v'nocham b'chel Gog u'Magog. God shall come forth and fight against Gog u'Magog. V'chol Yisrael yeru b'shuv Hashem Tzion. All of Yisrael will witness the return of God to Zion. Ki ish milchamot v'kova Yeshua b'rosho v'yalbash shiryon, etc., etc. Vayiplu kulam pigarim meitim. All of this death and destruction will happen where? The Bikat Arbel. We are not those who believe in Armageddon. Armageddon is Har Megiddo. That is where the Christians base their apocalyptic vision. But the Jewish Misorah, our apocalypse, so to speak, if apocalypse means this great battle that ends all time, happens in Arbel, which is in the area of Tiberia. Vayitzu kol Yisrael v'shalalu et sholalehem uvazazu et bozazehem. That's a verse from Yechezkel that describes the end of days. So the Rebbe Lazar HaKalier, the Paitan, and here Sefer Zerubbabel are talking about the Mashiach ben Yosef, like Rav Saadia Gaon had discussed, also coming from the north, and the war of Gog and Magog happening in the north. And I'm just going to end with these slides here. What you see here is a picture of the Beit Knesset in Arbel. Now, the Beit Knesset in Arbel is very curious in that it's the only Beit Knesset that has its entrance facing east. In other words, here I am with the Kinneret behind me, and I'm walking into the Beit Knesset in Arbel. All of the other Batei Knesiot in the Galilee have their entrances from the south. In other words, you would enter the Beit Knesset and then you would turn around and pray in the direction of Jerusalem. But here the entrance is to the east. And there are stories that abound of the sages in the north, in Sipori, in Sichin, in different places within the north that mimicked the mimicked the temple worship, the way that avodah, the way that the worship was done in the temple, that is what they did in their cities. And the fact that the entrance of the synagogue to Arbel is in the east is very telling, because the tradition that we have, and I'm sorry I'm not bringing you the sources here, but time has run out. The tradition that we have is that the Shekhinah, the presence of God, will re-enter into Am Yisrael and into Har HaBayit, into the Temple Mount, from the east, from the Shar HaRachamim, from the eastern gate. So that Arbel, which is the site of Armageddon, or is the site of Machamet Gog Magog, to be more precise, and is the site where Menachem ben Amiel, where Mashiach will emerge, and is within the vicinity of the Sanhedrin, once again being revitalized, that it has its entrance to the east, is extremely telling, in that it implies that the architects of this Beit Knesset were very aware and were perhaps very hopeful that they were living in the days of Geula. Back then, 1,500 years ago, when this Beit Knesset was built. I can say that our Beit Knesset in Steilan also does have its entrance to the east, although obviously we face Yerushalayim when we pray. And so just to recap this idea of Geula coming from the Galilee, we have a very strong motif within the rabbinic sources that the Sanhedrin disbanded here in the Galilee. And so it is here that they will once again convene and revitalize before moving on to Yerushalayim. We have a very strong motif of biblical figures being interred here, and rabbinic figures being interred here, and later sages being interred here, because Misham Atidin Ligael, because here has a promise of redemption, starting here in the north and then working our way down to you towards Yerushalayim. And we see through the architecture of Arbel and the literature that abounded and was produced around Arbel, a sense even back 1,600 years ago, that though we may be living in a time when we don't have a Mashiach, and even back then where there was not a rebuilt Yerushalayim, that the Geula will be starting from here, from our space. Even if Tiberia is a brand new city, doesn't have a Mesorah going back to Yerushalayim. We are not as steeped in Kedusha as Yerushalayim, as you are. However, our Mesorah is extremely strong, that even from the non-obvious, like Tiberia, there comes a great Kedusha. So with this, I will end by saying that I hope that we can join the special Kedusha of the Galil, of the north, that I'm starting to feel very, very strongly, and make our way down to that obvious Nachala, from our Menucha to our Nachala, to Yerushalayim, and celebrate together in the revitalized and rebuilt Beit HaMikdash, and bring some sweetness to this Mar Cheshvan. And I thank you so, so much for having me. It's a real pleasure. I'm happy to take any questions.
Can you explain what you said about Rambam? Where did he die and how did he get to Tveria?
The Rambam died in Egypt. And legend has, and he asked that he be buried in Eretz Israel, but he wasn't specific about his burial. Legend, and I do mean legend, has it that his bier arrives in Akko, as was the main port at that time, and it was loaded onto a camel. And the instructions were, wherever the camel lands, that's where he shall be buried. And lo and behold, the camel makes it to Tiberia. I do not believe that that has to be taken literally as fact. I believe that he intended to be buried in Tiberia because that is where everybody was buried for the most part, especially if you're landing in the port of Akko. It is in fairly close vicinity, but also because in the Rambam's own writings, he speaks about the rejuvenation of the Sanhedrin taking place in Tiberia, and Mimoshe ad Moshe lo kam kemoshe. We need to have the Rambam on our Sanhedrin. that's almost, that's muvan me'elav. How do we know that the Rambam is buried where he's buried? Well, as they were doing excavations to expand, to build that beautiful monument that you saw, they came across the matzeva, that tombstone of Rav David ben Amram ben Moshe, the grandson of the Rambam. And in Rav David's writings, he said that he had come to Tiberia to clean up his grandfather's destroyed tombstone. If you recall, there was a cherem put out against the Rambam. It might be a good thing to be put into cherem because you're being pretty august company, including the Ramchal and including the Rambam, both of whom are buried in Tiberia. There was a cherem put out and his tombstone was defaced. And his grandson writes, I come to Tiberia to fix my grandfather's tombstone, and I wish to be buried here alongside him. That they found the matzeva of Rav David, which is now on display in the men's section of the Keper HaRambam. It indicates very, very strongly that the Rambam is buried where we believe him to be buried. So that is not apocryphal. Pretty much everything else in Tiberia could be said to be apocryphal, pretty much everything. But the Rambam is buried where we believe him to be buried. Any other questions?
Good question.
Just before Avraham moves a vote of thanks, I just want to mention that we hope with fairly high certainty that the recording of this will appear on the Shul's website, just as we put previous talks in this series on the Shul's website within a 2 or 3 days, I hope. Avram, I think we can call on you now.
I just want to say thank you on behalf of our community. It was a very enlightening talk. I learned a lot, and thank you very much, Irene and Mervyn, for organizing this, and to Tamar as well for speaking.
I hope that I get to meet you in person at some time. You can come up and visit the farm. We love having visitors up here.
Thank you.
So, no one else? Okay, so thank you all for being with us. We end now. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.